Could say yo.
Yo. All right, everybody, we are back with Creativity is the Cure. Today, I've got my very special guest, Alex Kelley, old friend of mine. Alex, how are you doing today?
I seem to be okay.
Where are you talking to us from? I'm in Los Angeles today.
Well, I'm in Rochester, New York. The town of Brighton specifically, if we really want to get in on that one.
Yes, we are both from Rochester, so it's good to talk to an old friend from there. All right, so Alex, a lot of people, when they think of creativity, they think of a definition like this: the use of imagination or original ideas, especially in the production of an artistic work. But one of the things we try to do with this podcast is think about and talk about how people use the same part of the brain that does creativity to do atypical things in their lives. So maybe a better definition would be: creativity is defined as the tendency to generate or recognize ideas, alternatives, or possibilities that may be useful in solving problems, communicating with others, and entertaining ourselves and others. Fair enough?
Oh, yeah.
All right, so I have you down here as three basic things: guitarist, educator, and photographer. So I've got a few questions to ask you here. First one: what is your first musical memory? When did you first realize you could comprehend music at such an advanced level?
Well, first off, I don't think I'm seeing things or hearing things at that advanced of a level, in my opinion. But at the same time, too, there are days that I would probably say the opposite, because of the fact that, this has been such the continued pursuit for so long, and I do feel like there's some element of existence that's keeping me involved. Even when I sometimes try to get out, it keeps pulling me back. But not to rip off movie references. But now the first musical memory, oddly enough, I can actually remember, playing as a kid, playing with my parents' records, or sitting there looking at records like Beatles' White Album or Rolling Stones' Sticky Fingers.
Right.
I can remember probably around kindergarten hearing the song "Carry On Wayward Son," and I liked the riff. It's the not quite progressive rock American style, obviously.
Right.
But after my mother died, my father began heavily going through her stuff, and I wound up getting certain things, and I'm sure things are still coming my way after a year and a half. One thing was this little book that she had, for me, from the time I was born, one of those kind of like baby books. I mean,
right.
It definitely shows its age just as much as I do. And there was something written in there which he mentioned, and I went looking for it, that said that I was looking to save my pennies to buy a guitar. And I didn't recognize the handwriting. It might be my grandmother. So I just wonder if that was at a time when we still lived with them, maybe when I was 3 or 4.
Right.
I don't remember that, though. But yeah, I do have a lot of memories of things like that. And then, certain things I did, like in 5th grade when I was sick for a week and sitting at home watching HBO. Flash Gordon was on, obviously, with the Queen soundtrack. And I think of... at that time, I also made like this little rock band out of modeling clay that my father wound up throwing in the trash.
Oh, no.
Yeah, because I put it on this one tray that we had, like that, all of us in the family used for, dinners or things like that. And so it was kind of in the way, and basically just went right in the trash.
No, but, leave it forever, Daddy.
Oh, I know. Actually, honestly, I really, really wish I had those even, all these decades later. Because I thought to my own satisfaction, even in my memory of sitting there watching, like at that point, maybe the Nostradamus special on HBO, I rolled up the bodies and had spears for heads, sliced, legs and arms onto them, and I had pressed guitars cut out, and I used thread in like gray clay to go from, guitar to amp and stuff. I mean, it honestly, as in my memory, it might be better than it really was, because I was, in 5th grade. But yeah, there are a lot of those little things that were just there.
Well, you were definitely an early age artistic renaissance man there.
And actually, I did play guitar that year a little bit because we had lessons in school. But
that was my next question. Actually, was guitar your first instrument?
Well, I know my grandfather was showing me stuff on piano when I was a little kid because he always had a piano, and it was actually an upright that had really long strings. It was like bigger than your standard home upright. Wow. He loved my mother's father. He loved piano. Thought it was the best instrument on the planet. He would have preferred, loved me to play that. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to play drums a little bit.
That I didn't know. Where did you have drums?
My father's mother played drums in jazz bands like up to World War II.
Wow, that is really cool.
And she has, and I still have. Actually, no, you and I once went to when we stopped to Mike Morgan's once. I had her snare drum with me. It was a Ludwig, this mahogany shell that I asked him about putting on a different throw-off, and he said if I did that, he'd kill me. So, such a, I guess, vintage drum, if it's, like 90 years old at this point, now. But wow. I actually do that still in storage.
Wow, that is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at drums, trumpets. Those are both interesting to me. Ultimately speaking, all roads really did lead to guitar and similar instruments, which I'm fine with. I have no issue with that. I do feel like that is, I don't know, who I am, despite the fact that in some ways guitar also is the sort of thing that, I don't know, on some levels it's so common that it's kind of cool, but it's so common that it's just like, oh, you play guitar? I don't know.
All right, well, speaking of guitars, tell me a little bit about the different guitars you've had and owned over the years. What's different about them? And then maybe a little bit about which effects pedals that you've had or still use.
Yeah, I mean, I'll lead off all the guitars that I currently have. There's only one guitar I own right now that you've never seen, which is just a Strat that's a lot like Christine's, just different color.
Right.
Which some guitars that I had, actually there was that one guitar I had when we first met that I only owned it for like half a year, and I kind of, it would be nice to still have it, but it's sort of, I don't feel like I totally miss it. It was this one Guild that was made around 1980. I mean, I had some, I don't know, one other electric, a couple of acoustics, but I mean, the ones that I have for a reason. I mean, there's one sitting next to me that's, kind of a copy of a Gibson 335 that's heavy that I bought in 1997 that I use. I was using that actually, and I know this kind of will kind of lead into some of your other questions. Actually, I think the next question, but like this 335 copy I was using. It's in new standard tuning, or the C pentatonics tuning, the Guitarcraft tuning.
Right.
It's I was using that this winter, or actually no, this spring, to make videos that I put on my YouTube channel of chord vamps that are in that tuning for people I was working with this winter, and then beyond. That's a different story, so I'm not going to go off on that tangent at the moment.
And are you still using the red PRS that I remember?
Yeah, I do, and I've been telling myself for a couple of months now that I'm going to put it back into that tuning, because a year ago I put it into the standard tuning of VAD GVE, so that because I was asked last year to record some Rush riffs for the YouTube channel that I'm part of, and I basically played the riffs, recorded the riffs, messed with it a little bit here and there, maybe used it in a couple of online lessons, but for the most part, there was that point 22-ish years ago, 23 years ago, that I put it in that tuning, the Guitarcraft tuning, and my brain really wants it to be in that tuning, so I really just need to put it back in that tuning and use it again, because that's a guitar that, even though it's been kind of a focal point guitar, for the past 32 years, I haven't really used it a lot in the last, 8 years, oddly enough.
Right.
I played it, I played it out when I was hired to play at MCC in November of 22. And prior to that, I was using it with one band that basically ended around 2015. So from 15 to now, almost, basically just about a decade, I've hardly used it, which is a little, I don't know, a little sad, a little lame. I didn't even have it out of case in the year 2020. And I kept thinking, there was a part of my brain that wanted to get superstitious and say pandemic stuff isn't because I didn't take the guitar out of the case, is it? Which obviously.
So what about effects pedals? What's your setup these days?
I actually have for use next to me. So I'm sitting at a table in my dining room here, and I have the 27-inch iMac that is kind of the center point of what I do. I have a Quilter tone block amp that's a small solid state amp that can get loud, sitting on top of a DV Mark jazz cabinet that is 2 8-inch speakers. So it's this kind of compact setup that actually has punch. For the effects, because the Quilter amp is just a loud box, it's just a little slab of metal that makes everything loud and has this little tone capability. It doesn't really have effects. So I actually have a Sonicake multi-effects pedal, which sounds ridiculous, but it was something I found on Amazon in 2018 for like $80. It's distortion, chorus, reverb, and delay.
Wow.
And it sounds good enough to use in this situation. I had it when I played one show out. I thought, and I still use the Boss pedal board that I had.
Right.
I still have in storage. But I thought this was good enough for like band practices, or would be good enough for lessons to sit here. And it's compact. It's basically it's kind of meant to have an 80s type of sound. And even though it was marketed as Scorpions, Van Halen, I thought, well, it's the same effects that Andy Summers had. It's the same effects that Jamie Weststorm was using.
Right.
So we thought, it's just kind of these 80s sounding little effects in one skinny little box that was based on the Tech 21 fly rigs. So I just have a small, simple setup here. I mean, I got other pedals that I purchased, a TC delay, some fuzz pedals like the Big Muffs from Electro Harmonics. They have the op amp that's based on Billy Corgan's sound, because he was using the late 70s op amp pedals, and I got their Triangle on sale because Sweetwater had like a big sale, so I thought, I'll grab it. But for shows that I've played, because I was playing out by myself a bit in 2019, and I did play on the 6th of this month.
And for listeners, this is the type of thing when you play by yourself, you're using loop pedals and making layers and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, like for those shows, they were art gallery shows, and then this one this month was a birthday party. It was me with a Taylor acoustic going into a looping pedal, and then into a delay pedal, or I also have a Electro Harmonics freeze pedal, which when I first saw that marketed, I thought, what do you do with that? And then when I saw Bill Frisell using it in a video, I thought, oh, that's awesome. But then it was Bill Frisell, so everything was going to be awesome.
Yeah. So are these gigs mainly improv, or do you have songs planned ahead?
I do have things planned ahead, but even the things that I have planned ahead are usually subject to improvisation. Like, because I will use Guitarcraft repertoire, but because Guitarcraft repertoire is usually an ensemble piece, it's usually a lot of notes really fast. I kind of rearranged everything to fit into what would be normal people listening to or not listening to it in, like, say, an art gallery. And these songs that might be 2 minutes become 12 minutes. So it's a world of improvisation. And actually what I did at the beginning of this month, because this was on a rooftop next to the House of Guitars in Arundecoit, New York, I-Square has a nice rooftop, and it was rented out for that birthday party. There happened to be a band playing on the open-air stage next to the House of Guitars.
Yeah, I did see that streaming. I know exactly what you're talking about.
So I kind of had to play with them. So everything I had ready to play, it was a case of, all right, I can hear them clearly. Anyone sitting around me could hear them clearly. I absolutely have to play whatever they're playing, otherwise it's going to sound like garbage. So in that respect,
that is truly using your creativity in the moment.
Yeah, and that's honestly, that's the kind of stuff I've been even going back to when I started playing. That was the kind of thing that I viewed as, if you're a real musician, not that I'm trying to be arrogant or anything here, but if you're, I always, misguidedly thought that, someone who's a real musician, professional musician, would be writing, would be improvising. Little did I know, living in, the area around Rochester, Syracuse, New York, that the working musicians are playing covers, more covers, and a few covers.
Yeah, I think there's an aspect to that, though. If you're a painter, if I think about someone like Salvador Dali, they got to learn the classics first. They learn the styles of other painters, and they develop their own. And I think on one hand, you're right. To make money at first, you need to play covers, but it also helps you write better songs because, you're learning 30 songs by different people in different genres. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, for the education of it, certainly, because I mean that's something that in high school wanting to play every Rush song that I could find, pretty hard to do in the '80s, because everything was spiky hair, but yeah, for the educational aspect of it, certainly, but I mean, obviously the those who make the money, who are active performers, even if they've been playing for 50 years, are still playing the same songs, because that's like Frank Zappa said at the New York City Garrick Theater residency, that people wanted something familiar and something they couldn't get anywhere else.
Yeah, I recently took my two sons to see Peter Gabriel at the Forum here in LA, and I thought what he did was really cool. As artists get older, a lot of times people don't want to hear their new stuff, but what he did is he came out, played the whole new album, did an intermission, and then just blew everybody away with like an hour of hits.
And I know he's always changed songs a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe not all, but because when I was doing that one project for school, where I kind of did my version, and here I am talking about doing a cover of Games Without Frontiers, I looked at a few different versions of how he did it, and they were all different. I mean, every single performance from 87 to 2002 to 2014, and they all had slightly different vocal melodies or certain arrangements, which is one of the great things about what he's always done.
Well, that's a great question I want to ask you. I've had this argument or discussion with a lot of people. Some people, when they go see someone live, they want to hear it exactly the same. I like it when it's very different. Like, I'll never forget the first time I saw Sting, and he was playing really different versions of stuff. But, that being said, I love, Phil Collins' drumming and Bill Bruford's drumming, but if you saw Phil, every night he'd play the drums exactly the same. I think part of the problem when Bill was in Genesis was he didn't do that. Every night was different. So I guess it's, what type of stuff you like and what you're expecting.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the audiences. I mean, someone who's the jam band fans, the whole idea of taping every show was, this one was from this night, this is the next night, it's totally different.
Right. Oh, I actually forgot to ask you, what kind of amplifier do you use?
Well, that's what I was mentioning earlier. I've been using, for electric guitar, I've been using a Quilter, which is, as far as I know, a California company. They're pretty well known at this point, at least in the guitar world. I mean, I guess I say they're pretty well known. They're probably as well known and as esoteric equally, in so much as the guitar world's moved away from tube amps at this point,
right,
for the most part. I mean, I still have my Marshall. It's tucked away. I'd love to use it again. Though as the years go on, it's not like I'm getting stronger. Actually, carry that thing. Yeah, a lot of the younger and younger players have been really getting into modeling, which I get, but I'm a little leery of that kind of thing because it can be sort of a pale representation of what people ostensibly want to hear.
Right.
And that's where, for me, the Quilter, because it is, like I said, just kind of a loud box with no effects, it can distort, it does shape the tonality a bit. I just thought, a lot of effects pedals and a lot of effects pedal companies, and people have definitely gone away from rack mount gear. There are a lot of pedal companies that are making some really fun pedals out there. And at that point, some of the distortion sounds, it's kind of like with the snare. You could have these toms there and that bass drum, but the snare winds up being the heart of the drum kit, in my opinion.
Yeah, and the signature of a drummer, although it really is starting to bother me with everyone using Beat Detective and replacing the snare sounds, because you're kind of, in a lot of ways, losing the personality that you and I grew up with.
Yeah, and that's the same like with the modeling amps, because they're modeling distortion and amp sounds. It does start to rob the personality. I mean, that's where different distortion pedals, EQ or overdrive pedals, fuzz pedals, those can be fun. I mean, as far as signature sound, someone like David Torn, for instance, he has fuzz pedal manufacturers sending him pedals because he's like the man when it comes to using fuzz pedals, basically. And they all have a pretty similar sound, honestly. But what can be done with them? Right.
Okay. Now, speaking of that, give me 3 of your favorite guitarists, and why are they some of your favorites? You don't have to be, ultimately like this is it, but just tell us 3 that you really enjoy and why you like their playing.
Well, I think in many cases the go-to, and it could be easily inferred by a lot of people and assumed, is, certainly in the chronological order of the people who I was hearing that were interesting to me, I'd start with Andy Summers, right? Because I did certainly, there were various rock songs I was hearing, various players. In 3rd grade, I had a copy of Blondie's Parallel Lines. I didn't know Robert Fripp played on that. It was just music. Whereas in 4th grade, that's when I heard and saw the video for "Don't Stand So Close to Me."
Right.
And there was something cool about what Andy was doing. And then it was 5th grade that I got into Rush, and obviously Alex Life's. And it didn't hurt that we had the same name. And I didn't know anyone who had my name, because nobody was naming their kids, giving their kids my name at that time frame.
Right.
And then, obviously, at a certain point, then Robert Fripp became pretty pivotal for good and for bad. I'd say all good, actually.
So we can go with those 3s. And yeah, I'm glad you brought up Andy Summers, because most people I know, if they know who he is, it's because of the Police. But a lot of people don't know all the session work he did and the stuff with Robert Fripp, and the fact that he's a great jazz player, because I think, if I remember correctly, he started that way. And one of my favorite albums he did is the one he dedicated to Thelonious Monk, covers of all Monk stuff, and he really took it in a different direction.
Yeah. I wanted to get into his early 90s stuff more, but I feel like early 90s jazz, even what Metheny was doing, Al Di Meola, I didn't like the sound that they were coming up with in the early 90s, but as the 90s wore on, I mean, Last Dance of Mr. X, that album that Andy Summers put out was like 97-ish. I thought it had good stuff on it, but it's not a go-to for me. But yeah, by the time he got into this century and was doing, Green Chimneys was the Monk album.
Yeah, and tell me if the title is correct. Isn't there one called Synesthesia? I think, if I remember that correctly, that was one of the latter ones that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, Synesthesia was one of them. I actually referenced that in at least a couple of projects for my master's degree. I was because I was allowed to write up about players I liked. I'm actually going through my file right now to look for my Andy Summers folder here, and I don't have that much in here right now. Green Chimneys, Peggy's Blue Skylight. I really liked Peggy's Blue Skylight. That was the Mingus album. Right. Golden Wire in '88. That I liked. That I got from you. Metal Dog.
He's kind of, though, like Prince, He's put out so much work, you don't have to like a lot of it, but I think everybody can find something that they like.
Well, that Harmonics of the Night I thought was really good. That was the last one, I think. That was like in 21 that he put that out, and that was like a trio. It was Harmonics of the Night, Metal Dog, and was it Trioluminance, something like that, a Trivioluminance. That was a really good album.
Yeah, and I know that you and I used to listen to these 2 albums a lot. I love the 2 he did with Robert Fripp. I think it was Bewitched and I Advanced Masked. Is that correct?
Yes. And I think they're re-released, actually.
Wow. I wanted to ask you, you've been bringing something up that I'm sure a lot of non-guitar players don't know what you're talking about. So could you tell everybody, what is Robert Fripp's guitar craft? How did you get involved in it, and why is it important to you?
That was something since, I mean, he began that in 1985 based on his seeing of the tuning, well, as he would say, while lying in a sauna sweating in New York City. He envisioned the idea of beginning the guitar tuning with C, because that is the beginning of our Western musical alphabet, and then going up in, like, at that point, C, G, D, A is a cello, and throw the E on the top end, G, D, A, E is a violin, and then he has the G on the top because of the fact that if you try to bring that up to a B, it's just going to break.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what year it was. I think it was before I met you. I got to go to Ithaca, New York, and see one of the first versions of Guitarcraft. Thinking late 80s, early 90s. When would that be?
Might have been 90, I think, because I know the one person I do know from that was doing merch. I mean, I know a bunch of people who were playing there, but I no one really said the date, but I feel like it might have been in 90. I know I was invited to go to their show in Buffalo it would have been probably October of 90, but I didn't go. Because I was in guitar class and band practice, and I kind of chose to play, not watch. But
well, why don't we describe what a Guitarcraft performance would be like? What instruments? Obviously guitar. What type of guitars? How do they set up? What type of places do they play?
Okay. Well, at this point, a lot of that takes place usually in churches because of or cathedrals. I mean, the last time I was on a project, we were in a cathedral in Detroit 8 years ago. The Standard League of Crafty Guitars performances was normally a semicircle, because the idea there is the work that's done is in a circle, and essentially you're opening up the semicircle to allow the audience to be the other half of the circle. And I shouldn't say allow. The audience, as some of Robert's aphorisms would state, would be the audience, and the musicians are the parents to music, because the idea there that you kind of need people to hear it.
Right.
And those kind of cathedral or large church performances could have some of that encircling the audience completely. But there was also at one point where all of us were just kind of on the vestibule in front of the altar. So it wasn't. It was. I don't want to describe it as a mass of people or a crowd, but it wasn't really. Oh, we're stationed in a specific fashion at that point. And some of those, which would be the orchestra of crafty guitarist performances, those were more wandering. So you would have people moving around, and it is just full improvisation where someone's playing a note. If maybe you begin playing, and someone comes over and they're playing with you because they're hearing what you're doing and they're branching off of that, vice versa. And there would be pieces like at that performance, Red was one of the pieces performed.
For people that don't know, that is a song by King Crimson.
Yes.
Right, and also, just in case people are listening, they don't know, Robert Fripp, you'd probably agree, is most known for his band King Crimson, and I'm sure everybody heard his guitar playing in Heroes by David Bowie.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, too, because you're so deep in it, from an outsider's point of view, I think I only saw Guitarcraft once, but I'll never forget how unique it was to me at first. I think there were 18 players, and it sounded like one gigantic guitar, and they were so well rehearsed at playing together, and so tight, it almost sounded like a harpsichord to me.
Yeah.
And then I remember I can't remember the song, but it's on the first album, the brown one, where he's sitting on the cover in the black and white outfit. It's like each person in the group played one note at a time, and it kept going around and around.
Right. That was something they showed on MTV at that time frame too.
Was that on the on? I remember at one point VH1 to my younger listeners, which was another alternate station to MTV. They played a little more, what would I say, more music that's a little more out there, a little more liberal, and that's why we could see like Bill Bruford's Earthworks and Robert Fripp, right?
Yeah, I mean the VH1. I mean those clips are on YouTube, of course. Everything is. So anyone can seek those out. The League of Crafty Guitarists, VH1. I think it was New Visions or something like that was the name of the show.
Right. I think
Uh,
I think we need to point out. You can explain this better than me. If you look up guitar craft, I often at the beginning got confused with that and the 4-piece band that Robert had playing around New York with who's the bass player from B-52s, Sarah Lee. So
oh right, yeah.
what is that band called?
That was the League of Gentlemen.
The League of Gentlemen. And so then we have
Yeah.
Guitar Craft, and then there's the League of Crafty Guitarists.
Right. So the performing unit was the League of Crafty Guitarists. They were technically first performed in '86. Kind of got tucked away by '91 or two. I think the last performance might have been '91. I performed as a member of the League in 2003. There was certain at the same time there was a league performing concurrent in South America.
By the way,
They did-
what was that like for you? Did it expand your creativity or your perspective on guitar in any way?
Oh, I would definitely say yes. I can only say it helped. I mean that particular those months that we were sequestered away, or I mean I shouldn't say sequestered, but we did have a focus for the week, 6 days of work and a day off. It for me it was very it was nonstop. It's not like I was ever bored. It's not like I was ever thinking, oh, it was basically me, because there were certain players in the group who were definitely better than me and knew the material and were faster than me, and then there were players who maybe I kind of had more going on than them. So it was at that point it was basically a case of it at times felt like I was just hanging out.
Well,
And-
I you know what? I never forgot something you told me. I think you told me this. You had said that anybody, even non-guitar players, could try out for that, and it really wasn't about skill level. It was about intent. Am I correct about that?
Yeah. I mean, anyone can show up on a course, and at this point, they've had more people who are non-musicians. Maybe not more. I think they had a bunch in the '80s, but there are people who are non-musicians who are very welcome to show up. A certain focus has been there for listeners, intentional listening, and that's something I've done for various King Crimson performances. Like in the last decade, the only bands I've seen, I've seen 6 King Crimson performances in one Bill Frisell.
Wow.
And
Where did you see Bill? Where did you see Bill?
he was at what was called the Albright Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo. That was December 17. It was just him and Thomas Morgan. Thomas Morgan, an upright bass player who's like 43 at this point. They had songs. They would play like Epistrophe from that was a Monk tune, wasn't it? I
Yeah,
think so.
yeah, that's a great one.
And they had their songs, Bill's compositions, obviously, and that was nice auditorium. Which when Albright Knox did their renovation, a major renovation.
Yeah, that's a beautiful gallery. I haven't seen it since then, but I remember going there.
Yeah, the auditorium is what it was, but it was a great gallery beforehand, and now it's just monstrous.
Wow, next time I'm there, I got to shoot over. While we're on the topic, some of the artists you've mentioned, and a couple I'm going to add here, have developed their own tuning. Just off the top of my head, Robert Fripp, Joni Mitchell, Pat Metheny. What are your thoughts on these different tunings? Are they just interesting? Can they be necessary? Why would somebody do that to our non-guitarists out there?
Well, Joni Mitchell did it out of absolute necessity because of the polio that she had as a child rendered her hands a little weaker, so she said. And I'm not disputing her. It's her experience.
Right.
So she came up with it was like 52 tunings that she used over the course of her career.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah. Well, that's why in the '90s when Roland came out with the VG8s, she jumped on that because of the idea.
Yeah.
She was with an electric guitar, so she could have one guitar and as many tunings as she needed.
So you're saying she had them all programmed in there, right?
Yes.
So for listeners that don't know, Alex is talking about the VG8 guitar synthesizer, probably one of the best ones, if not the best they developed. Would you agree?
Well, at that point, it was new ground for them. I mean, it goes back to us talking about modeling, because that's where Roland did it off of their synthesizer, because they had the GR1 out at the time, which a lot of people still love to this day, 30 years later. But that was actually Roland saying, we have our guitar synthesis concept, let's take it further. And they were really the gang that started modeling. And I mean, it was more basic then, because they have more advanced modelers now, which you would hope. But it was certainly, at that point, out of convenience, but also the necessity.
And then you kind of spoke about it, but how would you differentiate Joni's different tunings to Robert's?
His was born out of what he saw, and not that I can really speak for Robert, but based on the things that he's said and written, in my understanding of it, is that he was seeing something based out of practicality, because he wanted a wider range on his guitar. And he said he thought about a 7-string guitar, but thought, I don't want that. And which 7 strings back in the early 80s were common for jazz players.
Right.
And certain classical guitars or lutes that would have 8 or 9 strings. But it was Steve Vai who made the modern 7-string big.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Is that the same one that has the little handle to make it easier to carry?
Well, Steve Vai did. I mean, at this point, 7 and 8-string guitars are really common with a lot of metal players, the progressive metal, people like, well, I'm not going to start going off in that territory because I'm about to butcher a name, and I don't want to butcher anyone's name.
It's okay.
I will say that, Robert came up with that out of the idea of, like I said earlier, our musical system, Western musical system, and of course I get specific saying Western being Eurocentric, because when I've said Western, people would think country and Western. No, Western civilization is Europe.
No, it's country and Western.
Yes, both genres. So, but at that point, C is the beginning. So, and fifths are a theoretically stronger interval than the fourth, that is EADGV. Roberts was born out of what he was obviously viewing as a benefit to extend the range of his instrument with 6 strings, which it does, and play something that has a grounding in chamber orchestras, the symphony, as far as I say, cello, violin, viola, whereas people like Joni Mitchell, Pat Metheny, Adrian Belew, David Torn, a lot of them have altered tuning, Chris Cornell, a lot of them have altered tunings for a certain mood. Metheny obviously is quite versed in what he's doing. So for him, it would be more of probably another intentional thing, like Robert, Adrian Belew. I think the song Heartbeat, actually, I think he changed 1 string.
Right.
Just to make himself have to do something different. And
paint yourself into a corner type of thing.
Yeah, kind of. And even with the bands that use open tunings that are more for slide guitar, because you can play 1 fret and have an entire chord, open D, open G, people like Keith Richards using that. That was all kind of similar to the standard old school tuning. So, because you're really saying, I got standard tuning, I'm going to lower this, I'm going to lower that, and I'll lower that there, and now I have this other tuning. It's very directly related, and in those slide tunings, open tunings, slide tunings, they have, as I say, their purpose that if you're holding a metal bar or wearing a metal tube on your finger, it's a lot easier to play a whole chord with any number of strings than to have to use old tuning and shift your finger around, which isn't really that hard to do, but, whatever.
Right, and I see what you're saying about practicality.
Yeah. Some of the 90s bands did it just because, and that's where, when it comes back to creativity, some of the 90s bands, like with Soundgarden, or I'm going to say even the Goo Goo Dolls, the idea is they're sitting around, messing around with their instruments, and maybe they're coming from a play perspective, like childlike play, and I was about to say childish, but childlike, in that they're just sort of doing what kids would do, and even they might be 24 years old, and experiments and say, what if I did this? Like a couple of those Goo Goo Dolls hits were the guitar was tuned like G, D, 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 D. So I mean, it's pretty basic, and almost like so basic it's ridiculous. Whereas I know for some of the Soundgarden things, there was the one song that was tuned with all E's, and that would have been more like, someone like Chris Cornell saying, "I'm going to do this just because I want to, and people can deal with it."
Yeah, I think it's good though for bands when they've done so many albums and worked together so long to mix it up. I think I'm correct in remembering there's a Talking Heads song on Little Creatures called "The Lady Don't Mind," and what they did on that one is they all switched instruments. So even though nobody was a virtuoso on the instrument they switched to, they came up with a song that they never would have otherwise.
Yeah, or like with Tina Weymouth, the fact that she played guitar on Naive Melody, which is why they called it Naive Melody, because she wasn't a guitar player, so she came up with that line that's, the song.
Wow, that's awesome. I didn't know that. That's a great song. Right. Definitely one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Let's take a short detour before we get into our next topic. Were your parents creative? Do you think their creative identity was possibly passed on to you at all genetically? Or another way to look at it is, do you see some of your creative talents coming from either or both of them?
I would say yes. I mean, I feel like there is some element of the DNA of it. I mean, because it goes back to the nurture and nature type of thing. Is it someone's nature to be this? Is it someone that just had that nurtured in them? Because my parents were very work-oriented my whole life, or duty-oriented is how I could say it. And it's the sort of thing that, I mean, my mother drew, my father, I think he might have been involved with drawing. I mean, my father used to put together model cars because he's always been a big car fan. He's always been inclined to fix things and come up with making something that he needs. Like for his lawnmower, he needed a gauge to, and this is like, a few months ago, he needed a gauge to check the depth of the blade on his lawnmower, which is riding lawnmower. And you can buy them, but he decided to just make it, so he just grabbed the wood that he had in the garage and some paper and created, whatever gauge for it. And as I say, my mother's father played piano. He was into marionettes, did do marionette shows at a Midtown Plaza here.
Oh, I love puppets. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, he was, and that's the thing. Obviously, there's a difference between puppets and marionettes, which a lot of people don't know, that puppets certainly are usually from underneath, like obviously Sesame Street and the Muppets, whereas marionettes have the strings, and very similar, types of shows. It's like is the puppeteer above or below, basically.
Well, and supposedly, Jim Henson came up with the word Muppet because it's a combination of marionette and puppet.
Yeah, that which makes total sense. I don't think I've heard that before, but it makes sense that. But yeah, I mean, so my mother's mother wasn't really consciously creative for the most part. She was a duty-bound person, and as I say, my father's mother, she played not just drums but saxophone and clarinets, and basically, as 1930s, 1940s, it's kind of like, all right, well, you got to stop playing music because you got to have a family because it's upstate New York and we're not really, cutting edge. It's like, be like Warhol and escape to New York City if you want to keep doing your thing. But how you're staying, well, I guess you're gonna just have your family and be miserable. Well, she was specifically, but that's a deeper story. But yeah, I do feel like I do feel like there is something inherent, but also, I mean, being around, it was a weird dichotomy, and I think it still is, even to this day for me, that there is that aspect of an artistic mentality, and I feel weird saying it because it feels arrogant, but there is some artistic mentality that was handed to me as a kid. There was an element of independence, especially because I don't have siblings, which was obviously more rare in the time that we were kids.
Right.
But it was the sort of thing where there's that, but also coupled with all these relatives of mine that it's sort of get a job, take a job, just do whatever you need to do. So it's kind of always been a bit of a fight in my head between that, because that creativity, that sense of creativity or being an artist, quote unquote, is there, and it's usually at odds with the person who has to pay bills. But then again, I suppose literally everyone can say that.
Yeah.
Beethoven was teaching the aristocrats' daughters, like, Fear Elise was written for an aristocrat's daughter. He hated those people because he was hardcore. Bach was a Lutheran, but he wrote requiems for the Catholic Church because he had 8,000 kids he had to support.
Right. All right. Now that we're on that topic, do you think creativity could be implemented in curing people or helping people with mental health struggles such as depression, anxiety? Any specific thoughts or insight on that?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the fields of music therapy and art therapy have been huge, and I see a lot of those job listings around this area, which, given that Nazareth University, they became a university from a college, Nazareth in outside Rochester, and Eastman School of Music, they have music therapy programs. Nazareth has art therapy programs. Hochstein in downtown Rochester does have music and I think art therapy. And then there are a lot of local graduates who stayed local who have opened their own little schools in Pittsford and whatnot. So it's certainly seen more readily as the benefit for individuals who have whatever issues in life, whether it's severe issues or minor, quote unquote minor, because obviously severe and minor are relative to the individual. What was I thinking? No,
I think that's great. Have you personally ever used creativity to solve challenges in your life? So I'm talking about just that part of your brain.
Well, that's kind of like you kind of said it in your intro, that also it's similar. There's a book, there's a book that was published in 2005, Creativity, Theory, and Practice by Rob Pope, who teaches at Oxford.
Ooh, I don't have that one. I'll have to grab that.
Yeah, it's like 300 pages. Obviously, it's technically, I think, a textbook. I'm sure I probably came across it originally because it's one of those books that I think Robert Fripp photographed was on his stand for his daily reading, probably 15 years ago or something like that, because he's usually buying textbooks and reading them right after they're printed. But one of the things that always stuck out for me that the author said was looking at creativity as, like a center point for solving problems, or its creativity could be a necessary response to something that comes at us, whether it is good or bad. And a lot of times it is a case of how do I surpass this? How do I overcome this? Buffalo State, also another one of those colleges that are now university, and I'm not knocking them. But Buffalo State University, they've had since the late 80s a creativity or a master's in creative studies. And I didn't know this until a few years ago. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool, because my brain's thinking that'd be fun to have, but it's sort of, hey, here's a degree that you kind of already have to be in a situation, because if you get that degree, you're just someone with a degree that many people might see as useless. And I don't feel like that. That's not my sentiment. But it's interesting that I was looking at this when I was thinking about talking about this stuff. They changed the designation from creative studies to creativity and change leadership. And clearly that is meant to appeal to the business world, because creative studies is more of an academic sounding, degree, which appeals to me greatly. And then creativity and change leadership is a very business sounding degree, which, for me, it's a case of, I see the practicality in this. I'm sure the courses are the same. This makes me sad that you chose this to call it. Obviously, it makes sense that, some of their descriptions, their learning outcomes speak to the idea of being able to, overcome or address problems. And that is certainly in modern America, what we see is how do we overcome these issues whether it is born out of business, whether it is born out of societal changes and shifts of cultural perception from generation to generation or whatever. And by that I mean like Gen Z taking issue with this, and like there's a lot of generational Z, millennial, X, baby boomer type of back and forth. And if you have four generations that are adults and all four are working and trying to make a living, there is a certain need for awareness and problem solving for people to also recognize, well, these people have this perception. Not everyone, it's generalizing, but as a overall cohort. Feel free to stop me because you have more questions and I can just keep going.
No, I think these are really good answers. I would like to hear your response on a quote by Robert Fripp that I really like. He says, usually people think that it is the musicians who create the music, but in fact, it is music who creates the musicians.
Yeah, and that's also something that's similar. Like I've been, and I have 2 books near me right now, the Guitar Circle that Robert put out 2 years ago, and I also I've been reading the biography of Bill Frisell, Beautiful Dreamers, that there's a couple of sections in there talking about that yeah, I mean, anyone who's, and it sounds gatekeepery to say a true artist, because who defines that, that kind of thing. But at the same time, and I say that because a lot of people have, I feel like I've suffered from that kind of stuff growing up. But it's the sort of, people and their attitude. But it's the sort of thing where if someone's, I'd say you can sort of see the bands, the performers, the people who are artists, and probably universally we could recognize David Bowie was an artist. He changed. He adapted, but he didn't just adapt. He made other people say, "Oh, this is what we're doing now." He was a trendsetter. Someone like Bowie would be seen as an artist. Someone like Warhol was a very commercial savvy artist.
Right.
He was kind of esoteric in what he put out there, like his movies especially. But he was such the household name. He was famous for 15 minutes in infinity, type of thing.
Yeah.
But then you look at, and I'm going to start name checking bands, and if some listeners thinking, hey, you look at bands like Nickelback, for instance, they're the universal band for everyone to rip on, and I don't like them. But I don't want to name people negatively, but I am right now, obviously. One of the reasons that I know they take attitude, which a lot of people say, why doesn't everyone hate Nickelback? Well, they're a band that I think at least one of them, maybe the Chad Kroeger, their singer, in an interview said that they consciously wanted to be rock stars. So if someone says, we want to be rock stars, we want the money and the groupie of it, it's going to get people labeled as, okay, you're not really an artist, you're here for the money. And
right.
And there's certainly other bands that I could name that have fallen into that bill. So, I mean, it's the sort of thing where,
I think it's fine. There's different kinds of things out there. Somebody that likes that might check out some bands that you and I like and say, oh, that's too artsy fartsy for me. I'm here and I want to rock and I want to hear the hits.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. Someone at that point just wants straight out this. And that's the thing. It's a good example of there's something for everyone. And obviously, I've already walked away from your original question, but the original question that got us over here is that you're talking about as far as music creating the musician or the art creating the artist.
Right.
And that's where, someone like Robert Fripp is saying that we, the human, are irrelevant. Our self-expression is what's going to kind of make things kind of bad. And I've been there for myself. Like, I was definitely learning before I met you, and even like when I was first learning some of your songs, my brain would be like, oh, I'll do this and I'll do this. And that's because that's where I was. And usually that sucked, or it was definitely better to respond, not react, but to respond to what is around you. What's this person playing? Can I hear what they're playing? Can I lock in with it? Can I play a counter thing that works? And if I'm consciously saying, I shall do this, it might be bad.
I think in the best environment, it's a combination of both. I mean, I've talked to a few actors on this podcast that they say what it's like when you have to stick to the script, and when they want it, you just do some improv. But maybe the best is, you take a pass at it exactly like the composer or the director wants, and then you take a couple other takes, and I think oftentimes it ends up being a combination.
Well, yeah, and I mean, especially in rehearsals and recording, that's more possible. Live performance, sort of, hi, I'm going to die on stage, and then I get people afterward. I mean, I think of one of my similes to that was, growing up and learning, karate growing up, like from 6th grade up into college. The idea there was that if you're learning self-defense, if someone does attack you, you don't have the ability to say, I shall block at this and I shall kick here. You just have to respond. Yeah. Otherwise, your brain kicks in like, I will do this. Well, you're on the ground already.
Well, I think you're making a great point, because I think life in general, the only control, we learn this as we get older. We don't really have any control of anything other than how we can respond, right?
Yeah.
All right, Alex, this is going really great. I try to keep my podcast around an hour, so I think we should call this part 1. And if you'd be willing, I'll call you again soon, and let's do part 2, because I only got through half the questions. I think you did great, and I'm glad that we spent this much time on guitar and music. But when we come back for part 2, I'd love to ask you about being an educator and a photographer. Sound good?
Yeah, actually it does.
All right, Alex, thanks very much, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Okay, thank you.